Beneath the Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo, the glow of fluorescent bulbs buzzes steadily in hidden subterranean chambers. The clock reads 8:30 a.m. on August 6, 1945, as the thick, muggy heat of summer hangs heavy over a country locked in conflict for almost 4 years. Officers in damp, perspiration-soaked khaki outfits hunch over control panels, adjusting markers on enormous charts depicting the contracting borders of the Japanese domain. War Minister General Korichika Anami marches down the hallways with the poise of a lifelong warrior unacquainted with loss. Now 58, his rugged features reflect the unwavering faith of someone convinced of Japan's sacred mission. The daily update session ought to proceed as usual. Summaries from outpost leaders throughout the mainland territories, progress on the vast Ketsugo fortifications meant to render any U.S. landing prohibitively expensive, forcing the foe to negotiate terms. Yet, an irregularity emerges. The panel for the Chugoku region displays a blank slate, zero dawn dispatches from the 2nd General Army Base in Hiroshima. No news from the 400,000 troops in residence in Japan's 8th most populous urban center. Technicians fiddle with their dials, met only by hissing interference instead of the routine buzz of operational updates. "Sir," a junior radio specialist blurts out, beads of sweat trickling down his brow even in the chilly depths below. "We've been cut off entirely from Hiroshima. Every service channel, every broadcast station, it all fell quiet around 8:15 a.m. today." Anami's piercing gaze sharpens. Across 4 years of all-out combat, key metropolises don't just drop off the radar like this, not ones housing critical command posts, not places that, mere hours earlier, relayed standard readiness alerts. What earthly power could abruptly mute 340,000 souls? To grasp the perspective of these 6 figures steering Japan's destiny that August of 1945, consider their self-designated title, the Supreme War Council, or the Big Six. They truly felt they grasped the path to triumph, even while US B-29s reduced their urban centers to rubble under nightly firestorms. The lineup included General Anami, Admiral Soemu Toyota, General Yoshijiro Umezu, Prime Minister Admiral Kantaro Suzuki, Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu, Shigenori Togo, and Navy Minister Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai. 6 individuals with 70 million existences teetering on their decisions. What fueled their perilous assurance? They guarded intelligence far beyond American comprehension. From 1940 onward, Japan had hurried to develop its atomic weaponry through dual initiatives: the Army's NIGO initiative, led by Dr. Yoshio Nishina, and the Navy's EFGO effort directed by Dr. Bunsaku Arakatsu. Far from makeshift attempts, these drew on expertise. Nishina ranked among global pioneers in nuclear physics, having collaborated with Niels Bohr in Copenhagen and mastered the principles of atomic fission like few others. That insight revealed a vital truth. Assembling such bombs bordered on the unattainable. Enriching uranium demanded colossal infrastructure alone. Vast electromagnetic separators, heaps of ore weighing thousands of tons, energy draws that could black out provinces. Japan's top experts had estimated that even the robust U.S., with its unscathed factories, might yield just 1 or 2 such devices, perhaps 3 if they'd begun sooner than anticipated. Thus, as fragmented, clashing, and improbable accounts trickled in, the command echelon brushed them aside, armed with their insider edge. A handful of B-29s struck Hiroshima using a novel explosive, noted the initial clear bulletin from a scout aircraft. Extensive destruction noted. Admiral Toyota, head of naval operations, scarcely glanced away from his tactical diagrams. Extensive harm from a limited raid, he mused. He'd endured the colossal B-29 barrages that had already leveled 42 principal Japanese cities. Likely an intensified firebombing, the enemy's tactics are sharpening. But as time dragged on, the intelligence turned odder. Rail lines to Hiroshima stood halted without end. Armed signals stayed utterly disrupted. Most disturbing, a meteorological scout plane described an extraordinary sight, a towering fungi-like plume climbing to about 40,000 feet. Then arrived President Truman's broadcast via shortwave, intercepted by Japanese listeners. 16 hours earlier, a U.S. aircraft released a single bomb over Hiroshima, a vital Japanese military outpost. That weapon equaled the force of 20,000 tons of TNT. It was an atomic bomb. A profound hush enveloped the Supreme War Council chamber. General Anami broke it at last, his tone embodying the deliberate composure of a seasoned commander. The U.S. is waging a campaign of mental manipulation. Even supposing they've devised some atomic tool, the engineering demands preclude large-scale output. Our own studies back this up. Admiral Toyota shook his head solemnly. Had the United States held a stockpile of those bombs, they would have deployed them far earlier. This move screamed desperation, likely their sole weapon of that kind. Unbeknownst to them, their deep scientific knowledge had turned into their biggest vulnerability. Lessons from their own nuclear experiments had shown just how daunting the challenge was, yet it also left them oblivious to the staggering U.S. manufacturing prowess they simply couldn't grasp. The Manhattan Project involved 130,000 laborers spread across several states, guzzled more power than some countries used entirely, and stood as humanity's most massive covert industrial effort ever. Japanese commanders were basing their choices on what their experts deemed feasible, unaware they faced a foe that had completely rewritten the boundaries of what's achievable. As the night of August 6th gave way to August 7th, with initial shocking reports trickling in from squads hurrying to Hiroshima's devastation, those 6 leaders held fast to their convictions like shipwrecked men clutching wreckage. They remained clueless that their whole reality was on the verge of irreversible transformation. The events that followed wouldn't merely dismantle their battle plans, they'd upend their core grasp of combat itself. Dr. Yoshio Nishina had reviewed the mathematical models. He grasped, more than nearly anyone on Earth, the potential devastation of an atomic blast in concept. Yet concepts and actual events stretch across a vast divide, bridged solely by first-hand encounter. And on August 7, 1945, Nishina bridged it. The rail trip from Tokyo to Hiroshima's wreckage lasted 11 hours, passing through terrain that grew ever more bizarre. For miles approaching the city, he spotted leafless trees, utility poles broken like twigs, and a harsh, biting odor stinging his nose. Suddenly, the train halted. Rails up ahead were warped into bizarre coils by unimaginable power. Nishina trekked the last 5 miles on foot into the former Hiroshima. Zero, utterly nothing, had braced him for the sight. Structures weren't merely toppled, they'd evaporated. Silhouettes of humans etched eternally into walls of concrete, the spectral forms of folks heading to jobs when 8:15 a.m. marked their final instant. The hypocenter, site of the explosion 1,900 feet overhead, formed a flawless ring of total ruin, stretching miles outward. Most chilling were the people who'd endured. Nishina, a lifetime devotee to scientific discovery, confronted radiation poisoning head-on, a concept confined to abstract journals until then. Sufferers with flesh sloughing from their frames, individuals spewing crimson, locks of hair shedding in masses, the shambling undead weaving amid debris resembling an extraterrestrial world. Nishina's fingers shook as he wielded his Geiger counter. The rapid ticks intensified, nearing the blast's core. This transcended mere ordnance. It was nature's primal energies loosed upon a populated area. All his prior beliefs on atomic limits? Proven disastrously false. Back in Tokyo, the Supreme War Council was gearing up for updates that would render Hiroshima's horror a mere opening act. At 11:02 a.m. on August 9th, just as the Big Six convened to pore over Hiroshima's dispatches, an aide stormed the meeting chamber with tidings that blanched every complexion there. Nagasaki had suffered a second atomic strike. Silence gripped the space, broken only by Admiral Toyota's pen tumbling onto the polished wood. A second device. Merely 3 days on, that realization pulverized every premise the Japanese brass had desperately upheld. With 2 bombs in U.S. hands, 3 or 10 or 100 seemed inevitable. The bedrock of Japan's defense, inflict such heavy tolls on invaders they'd seek terms, now rang hollow. Why launch an assault when they could obliterate cities sequentially until only irradiated desolation lingered? Yet confronting this doomsday truth, General Anami refused to yield his ideal of noble demise over craven endurance. "Wouldn't it be magnificent?" he queried, his tone laced with an odd lyrical grace, "for our entire land to perish like a splendid bloom?" The council peers gaped at him, dumbfounded. Before them sat a figure so devoted to Bushido that he'd opt for the country's annihilation over capitulation. To him, Japan's vanishing and nuclear blaze held a pristine, almost artistic beauty, preferable to kneeling to invaders. But the harsh world was set to shatter that illusion most cruelly. On August 10th, the Japanese forces seized an American aviator, Marcus McDilda, just 2 days following the Hiroshima strike. During intense questioning, laced with brutality, he disclosed details that ultimately crumbled the resolve of Japan's armed forces. The catch was that McDilda possessed zero knowledge of nuclear devices. As a standard combat flyer, he'd received no updates on such arms. Yet, cornered by agony and yearning for life, he fed his interrogators the narrative he believed would satisfy them, weaving in fabricated specifics wherever possible. According to McDilda, the U.S. possessed more than 100 atomic devices. They were capable of unleashing 3 daily. Tokyo loomed as the imminent target, with Kyoto and Osaka soon after. All key urban centers in Japan faced total devastation in mere weeks. None of this held any truth. In fact, America had no atomic bombs left at that point. The subsequent one wouldn't be available until late August, and manufacturing progressed at a grueling pace. Nevertheless, McDilda's frantic fabrications included sufficient pseudo-technical elements to convince the desperate questioners who sought any clues about this baffling novel armament. When this invented intel arrived at the Supreme War Council, it struck like a decisive fatal strike. War Minister Anami, who had once waxed lyrical on the nation's doom, addressed his peers with the gravity of utter collapse in his tone. From the report, he recited that a single atomic blast could level 6 square miles, comparable to 2,000 B-29 bombers, each loaded with 300 traditional explosives. The U.S. seemed to hold 100 such bombs. They might release 3 each day. Tokyo could easily be the following objective. Silence enveloped the chamber, broken only by Admiral Suzuki's heavy breaths. These leaders had directed vast armies, directed operations spanning the Pacific, and evaded loss throughout. Yet now they confronted an instrument that rendered their strategic prowess as outdated as katanas amid rifles. Astonishingly, the impasse persisted. 3 in favor of capitulation. 3 insisting on prolonged battle, even amid nuclear devastation. Only an extraordinary meddling in Japanese annals would resolve the gridlock. Shortly before midnight on August 9, 1945, an event unfolded unseen for over a millennium in Japan's past. Emperor Hirohito, the divine figure who customarily stayed detached from mortal affairs, stepped into a meeting hall and directly resolved a governmental standoff. The occasion was without precedent and otherworldly. The 6 Supreme War Council members, plus Baron Kichiro Hiranuma, assumed kneeling stances around a gleaming surface. The emperor, modest in build yet imbued with sacred power, uttered phrases that would conclude not only the conflict but a whole paradigm of combat thought. "I have deeply pondered the domestic and international circumstances," Hirohito murmured, his tone scarcely audible. "We must endure the unendurable and tolerate the intolerable." At that instant, Japan's commanders grappled with the supreme dilemma, dignity versus existence. Some, such as Prime Minister Suzuki, embraced the altered landscape. Others, including General Anami, pursued another route. On August 15th, mere hours prior to the emperor's capitulation announcement, Anami conducted ceremonial seppuku at his residence. He perished as he had existed, bound by a fighter's ethos that nuclear arms had made irrelevant. His parting verse, inscribed in his own blood, expressed devotion to the emperor and sorrow over his shortened service. He failed to recognize the profound shift in the world. Yet the most poignant character might have been Admiral Toyota, who had boldly asserted that the Americans lacked numerous atomic bombs. Post-war, upon disclosure of the Manhattan Project's full extent and the revelation that U.S. manufacturing might have achieved what Japanese experts deemed unattainable, Toyota apparently gazed for hours at images of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, utterly mute. The nuclear strikes didn't merely conclude World War II. They signaled the close of a comprehensive doctrine of arms rooted in valor, self-sacrifice, and traditional combat. Today's strategists examine this episode not solely as past events, but as a cautionary tale on the perils of perceptual rigidity among commanders. How specialization can trap the mind, how specialized insight can hinder recognition of transformative shifts. In our era, confronting our own tech upheavals, artificial intelligence, digital conflicts, orbital armaments, the tale of Japan's wartime chiefs in August 1945 stays achingly pertinent. It underscores that the most severe martial calamities frequently arise not from foes outside, but from inward failure to evolve with emerging truths. The Japanese command couldn't accept the atomic bomb's ruinous might, for they had persuaded themselves it was unattainable. Their scholarly insights, their vocational mastery, their societal assurance, confidence itself, along with everything else, morphed into tools turned against them. Often, the biggest threat lies in the firm belief that you've mastered the game's guidelines, even as another player has quietly rewritten them for keeps. What insights are you drawing from this tale? We'd love to hear your reflections on guiding teams, harnessing tech, and the boldness needed to question what we think we know.